Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and this is the new Hiby R3 Mark II. Now, I know you're thinking there's been how many different Hiby R3s? How is this only Mark II? Well, it's in a different form factor. It's in a different chassis. Finally, they've updated that, and so I guess they've decided to go ahead and call this the Mark II. And for the past, honestly, couple of months, I've been living with and listening to this little DAP, and I'm ready to let you know what I think about it. And well, it's kind of interesting because Hiby is kind of, I don't know, maybe I'm missing somebody, but I feel like they're the only hi-fi company that is still making these entry-level digital audio players. You know, File's out of the game. Hyphaman, I don't know, who knows what they're doing. Shanling, they only make Android DAPs now, so if you want something that's not Android based, that's available at under a couple $100, Hiby is the only game in town that I can think of. And well, this new R3 Mark II actually makes them a little bit cheaper than they have been. So the last R3 that I reviewed about a year ago, that one was $210. And here with the R3 Mark II, it's in a new chassis, and they've actually been able to drop the price. It's down to $180. So it's about 15% cheaper than it used to be, which is kind of surprising. But is it actually better than the last one? Well, that's what I want to talk about. So I've got a lot of things to get through in this review. Hopefully we'll make this short and simple, but it never is with DAPs, so I'll just give you a fair warning there. But yeah, let's start by talking about the physical stuff here on the Hiby R3 Mark II, which is not the only place where there are changes, but it is probably the place where there are the most significant changes. And if you're curious, here is the, oh my gosh, so much dust. Here is the old Hiby R3. It was the Pro Saber or something like that. We'll put you to the side for now. But yeah, this is the new one. It comes in a couple different colors. I've got the black one on here. I think it comes in red, silver, something like that. Honestly, I might consider getting a different color because this black color is just super, it's a fingerprint magnet, as you can see. I believe the last generation one, it was like entirely covered it in an oleophobic coating, which meant it would literally slide off my tables. In fact, I just pulled this thing out to compare today, and as I was setting up for this review, it slid itself off of my table. I don't know what they did with this thing. This one doesn't seem to have that same problem. I haven't had it at least slide off of anything, but the downside is, well, it shows a lot of fingerprints. I mean, it is nice and, you know, nice materials. It's all glass here on the back, glass in the front, obviously, as well, and then kind of like a steel or aluminum outer. So nice materials, but definitely a fingerprint magnet. So just be warned and maybe make your color choices accordingly. Other than that, there are actually some pretty significant improvements to this. Actually, real quickly, I'll mention, and sorry for the dog barking there if you hear that, the new R3 Mark II is actually a smidge larger, if you can see that, a little bit taller top to bottom. Height-wise, maybe also a little bit thicker. So that's an interesting note. But I think more importantly are two big changes. One, you probably noticed there is a volume knob here on the Hiby R3 Mark II. And I generally like this. I think this is a good addition, but it does come with some caveats, all right? The pro of having a volume knob is, one, audiophiles like me, we just kind of like knobs. It's an obsession with knobs. Do with that what you will. But really what I like about it is it feels like you have a better sense of control over the volume. And you really do have a good control over volume here with the Hiby R3 Mark II. I've been mostly using this with IMs. And if you are familiar with using IMs on a digital audio player or even a dongle, you might know that a lot of times the steps between volume can be so large that it's hard to get the right volume. It's either too quiet or too loud, and really no problems at all here with the R3 Mark II. Obviously, the number of volume steps is kind of irrelevant when it comes to, or the whether there's a volume knob or not is irrelevant to that point, but it does make controlling the volume pretty pleasurable, if I'm honest. The buttons over here are otherwise, you know, mostly what you would expect, although there's a little bit of a weirdness here. Let's see if I can get this in focus. Let's see, camera, will you do it? Almost, kinda. Yeah, there we go. So it's a little bit weird. Normally, you have your normal like play pause button and your skip track previous, skip track next. What's a little bit weird is the arrangement where it looks like the play pause button and the next track button are on a rocker switch, which if it was a rocker switch, you would expect that to be like up and down and that to maybe be play and pause. And when I first started using this thing for like probably the first week, I kept making that mistake. I kept feeling this and feeling that that was the play pause button, but it's not the play pause button. A bit of an odd choice from Hiby. It looks like a thing that they are repeating on some of their other Android DAPs as well, so it's not unique to this device. It is just part of Hiby's new design language, and I don't know if it's the best choice, but I'll be honest, it's a thing you can get used to. It's not a big deal. Other than that, there is actually one big improvement here with the Hiby R3 Mark II, and that is where they've put the headphone jacks, all right? They've actually moved them to the bottom of the device, and for me, that is huge. One of my biggest issues with the older model Hiby R3 was that they had the headphone jacks here on the top. So there's a 2.5 mil balance and a 3.5 mil. Now they're on the bottom, and I know that's just a preference thing, and some people actually prefer to have the headphone jacks on the top of a device. For me personally, the way that I use my device, sitting on a table, putting the seat in my pocket upside down, I like to have the volume or the headphone jacks on the bottom. So I'm actually pretty appreciative of that. Some other people will probably also appreciate that the balanced port is now a 4.4 millimeter connector rather than a 2.5 millimeter. I'm personally not a big balanced guy, but when I do get sent in IMs for review that are balanced, almost all of them, I want to think, I'm pretty sure every single balanced cable that's been sent to me in 2023 has been 4.4 millimeters. So I think 2.5 is officially out the door, and it's good to see that Hiby has finally caught up in terms of which jacks they're putting on these entry-level players. Okay, apart from that, there's not much to cover on this thing physically. I mean, there's the memory card slot, which now has a cover on it, which is kind of cool. It does have USB-C for charging, and inside the box you get a USB-C cable as well as this silicone case that you can use for protecting it. Although, to be honest, I didn't use this. Interestingly, I think I didn't use it because this thing wasn't sliding off my couches and everything the way that the old one was. But yeah, so that is about as much as I can say about the physical stuff. Let me just make sure I'm not missing any notes, and I am not. So let's talk about what this thing is like to live with. What is the functionality here of the R3 Mark II? And I'm not going to talk much about sound. I think this thing sounds great. Volume output, you know what? I should actually have an answer on this. So let me look this up while I just kind of make a bunch of noises. But yeah, the sound on this thing is excellent. Like, again, I'm not one to really talk about sound quality when it comes to DAPs, and that's because most of the time they all sound basically the same. And if you think they sound different, that's good for you. Go on living your life thinking that they sound different, but I've spent a lot of time trying to find out if they sound different to me, and even at times thinking that they do sound different. But when I blind test myself to see if I can hear the differences, I don't hear the differences, and so I'm not going to tell you about these differences that, in my opinion, they don't exist. But yeah, in terms of power output on this, that's what I wanted to find out, because that's kind of like the only other important thing. I mean, I did not notice anything with noise floor. Like, I don't hear any noise floor. I don't have my most sensitive IMs on hand for comparison, so maybe I'm not doing the best comparison. But with all the IMs I've been testing, no issues with noise floor. Plenty of volume, obviously, for IMs, but it's also got plenty of volume for headphones. Although I will say, here looking at the stats, it looks like the max power output on 3.5 millimeter is 112 milliwatts, which is not massive, but honestly should be plenty. In fact, it is plenty to drive things like Sennheiser HD 600. So if you got a 300 ohm headphone or a typical Sennheiser 300 ohm headphone, it's going to work fine off this thing. And if you need, for whatever reasons, more power, you can use the balance connector and you get 380 milliwatts of power, which frankly is kind of a lot for a little device like this. So that's about as much as I'm going to say about the sound on this device, okay? If you want to hear more about the sound stage differences and the detail and the separation, you go find another reviewer that's going to make that stuff up for you. Okay, what else can I say about the functionality? I mean, let's dive into talking about the software, actually, because this is, as far as I can tell, like one of the first times that Hiby's made a significant update to their Hiby OS in a long, long time. And for the most part, it's more the same than it is different, but visually, I actually like this a lot. It's just a simpler look. It's a simpler, cleaner look, more big iconography, and less reliance on album artwork, which might be a controversial choice. So yeah, if I dive into, for example, this list of artists, you might notice there's no album arts. Is that a thing I disabled? Hold on. Before I tell you this thing is a thing, let me see if I disabled this, because that was a problem that I had with the last Hiby R3, and frankly, a lot of these little entry-level players, is that they'll have album art, but by the time you scroll past or scroll to something, like you have to wait a couple of seconds for the album art to show up. And frankly, for me, it was just kind of a detractor. So I don't think that it was adding anything to it. And yeah, looking at this, I do not see album art. Hold on, is it in here? I'm trying to remember if I turned this off or if it just doesn't display album art. Because again, I think that would be a bold move, but in my opinion, the right move. Okay, I'm not seeing anything. I apologize if I'm getting this incorrect. Hopefully you've seen the settings and noticed maybe me scrolling past a feature I didn't notice, but let's just say there's no album arts displayed here in the lists. And again, for me, that is a good thing because on the other players, like you scroll past, by the time it's useful, you've already scrolled past it, so I don't really care. I prefer to just have the clean look of this. Even when you tap into an artist, you see their albums. Again, I'm not seeing any album arts. And again, when you see the list of songs, no album arts. What that does mean is that it gives you more room for the text. And again, for me, that is the most useful part, assuming it takes as long to load as it typically does on these players. You will, of course, get album art once you click into start playing your music, and you can kind of see there how long it takes to load album arts on a little player like this. So you do still get your album art. It's just not in your lists. Okay, anything else to say about this general software experience? Okay, there's still a problem I have with this thing. It's a problem I had with the last player. It's a problem I have with even Hiby's Android software, which is, all right, here you can see I have a lot of albums by the artist Ghostly Kisses. And I might, very often, I'll like go to sleep and I just want to listen to Ghostly Kisses albums, right? So I want to listen to all of her albums in order. You can't do that on a Hiby player. I can click this button here in the top right corner. It will list out all of the songs that are in all of her albums, so I can listen to all of her music, which is good, but it's just going to play in alphabetical order. As you can see, A, B, C, D comes after C. So this is all just in alphabetical order rather than in the order that the album comes in, which is kind of a problem. If you want to listen to the album order, you can click into each individual album, which is fine. That's good. But I still do wish that would be an album order. It's still a function I miss on these players. Hiby, do it, please. Let's see, anything else to say? Okay, there is another issue that still exists here in this player that I had with the last player as well. You can see as I scroll this list of my artists, and I do have quite a few artists here on my memory card, that this column of letters appears over here on the right. And you can actually use that as a shortcut to navigate this list and quick scroll to the top and the bottom, which is a cool feature. But it has a weird bug in it where like it'll just kind of stick and freeze sometimes. And like I can't tap anything until that menu goes away. And sometimes this thing will just hang there for like 5-10 seconds. And I don't know how to reproduce it. Obviously I'd show it to you if I could. But it is nonetheless a sticking problem. And it just kind of goes to show that like you can see the scrolling speed on this thing, or like the refresh rate of the screen is not super great. It's still pretty low powered hardware, but that's, I guess, what you should expect for a sub $200 digital audio player. It's not running Android. It's just running Hiby's own OS, which I think is built on top of Linux. So it's probably possible to make it faster, but we haven't gotten it yet. So there's that issue with the letter scroller. Another thing I wanted to mention, just kind of on the topic of software issues, is there's a number of different ways that you can conserve battery life on this thing when you're not using it. You can have it go into a sleep mode, you can have it auto power off, or you can have it go into standby mode. I find that standby mode is the most convenient because you can just click this, it'll turn itself back on really quickly. And it still seems to retain, like, standby battery life is really, really good. It's not going to drain the battery super quickly when it's in that mode. So I like that there is that standby mode. But when it's in standby mode, for whatever reason, when I plug the charger into the bottom of this thing, it won't start charging. I have to disconnect it from the charger, break it out of standby mode by tapping the button, and then connect it to the charger, which it might seem like who cares, but the only reason I bring it up is there's been a few times where I plugged this thing in, like it's been almost out of battery. I plugged it into the charger and I didn't realize that it was in standby mode, because it goes into standby mode pretty quick. I didn't realize that, and then I came back to the player at the end of the day and it was still an empty battery because it doesn't charge while in standby mode. Kind of an annoying little quirk there. And you might think, okay, it's maybe a software quirk. Maybe these are things that Hiby could improve with firmware, and it's very possible. It is possible to do a firmware update on this device, even over Wi-Fi, which is nice. Let's see if I can find that option. Is it down here? Yeah, firmware update, and you can do it via OTA. So it'll just connect to your Wi-Fi and perform that software update, which is pretty cool. But just don't expect firmware updates very quickly. I've had this device, I think, since late August. And the reason this review is just happening now is that for the first couple of months that I had it, there was a problem with the software where even my albums were not in order. So, right? So I was complaining about not being able to listen to Ghostly Kisses, all of her albums in order. There used to be a problem where if I went to any album, this would just be in alphabetical order. And I'm an album listener, so I really can't use a device that doesn't do that. They did finally fix that with firmware, but again, it took a couple of months. So yeah, I wouldn't bank on the software experience necessarily improving with firmware updates, even though it's a possibility. And if you complain enough to Hiby, maybe it'll happen. But just, if you're going to buy this thing, buy it as is. So, okay, so that is enough of me moaning about the software, I believe. And I guess also just like full disclosure, I moan about the software on pretty much all of these digital audio players. So overall, I think the software experience on this thing is pretty decent. Again, they've made some improvements that I feel like removing the album arts just makes it a cleaner software experience. I like the way that the UI looks. I like the way that this screen looks. And that might seem simple, might seem superficial, but for me, that actually matters. So yeah, generally, I would say the software experience is solid, but it's got some quirks for sure. Other than that, experience-wise, I talked about the sound, talked about the software. The one other thing I wanted to mention is the battery life on this device, which unfortunately is a downgrade versus the last R3. So the last R3, I believe they claimed around 20 hours of battery life, and I went back and watched my review. It sounds like I was getting around 20 hours of battery. This one, they claim about 15 hours of battery life, and I'm getting that, maybe even a little bit worse. And I'm listening on the 3.5 millimeter connector for the most part. So basically, I've been using this as I go to bed. I sleep for about 7 hours a night, and I can't make it through 2 nights of sleeping with this thing playing. So I think I'm getting a little bit less than 15 hours of battery life, which is a bit of a bummer. Again, the standby battery life is pretty good, that's actually pretty important for me, because if I put down a player, don't use it for a few days, come back to it and it's dead, I hate that. That's the thing that bugs me about a lot of, especially like the Android-based players. So I do like that this has that standby mode that avoids that, but I would wish that the playback time would be a little bit better. So 15 hours of playback, depending on how you use it, it's about a day and a half of usage, or maybe 2 days of usage if you can squeak it out. So I wish it was better, but it is what it is. Anything else to talk about? Honestly, I think that's about as much as you need to know about the Hiby R3 Mark II. If you've got questions about it, please do leave them in the comments. But I got to give this thing a rating. And out of 5 stars, it's actually kind of hard to rate this thing, because under $200, again, this entry-level DAP market, there is nothing else really to compare it to. I can compare it to their last model. And frankly, I like this a little bit better than the last model. Primarily, honestly, the biggest thing for me is having the headphone jacks on the bottom, which again, might seem superficial, but that matters to me more than the battery life. The volume knob, I like it. It is sometimes easy to accidentally click it and accidentally turn on the screen when you're just trying to change the volume, but for the most part, I'm happy that there is a volume knob. And so, I don't know that it's on the whole necessarily better than the last one. So if you've got the last one, you're probably good with this one. But I don't think that's worse, and it's cheaper. So out of 5 stars, I'm going to give the Hiby R3 Mark II, I'll give it 4 stars. I think it achieves 4 stars. But I'll be honest, it is on the verge because of some of those nitpicks I had. Honestly, I think the biggest issue with this player is actually that the Hiby R5, hold on, let me grab it real quick. The Hiby R5, that was a professional transition, is this player. This is my daily player. This thing is an Android-based player. Obviously, it's bigger, but the battery life is just a ton better. It's Android, so like the smoothness is so much better. I can play all of Ghostly Kisses in whatever order I want to. So I like this player a lot better, and it's only $350 now. So that's like honestly the biggest competition for this. Obviously, that's a lot more. That's almost like double the price of this thing. So maybe it's not really fair to say that this is competition for it, but I personally would have a hard time buying this knowing that I can get that for $350, but I understand if you can. If you want to check out the Hiby R3 Mark II, I've got it linked in the description down below. Shout out to Hiby for sending this thing in for review. I've got them linked as well, and while you're down there, if you haven't already, please do hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, and I will catch you on the next super review, which may or may not be in this room. Yeah, it's been fun reviewing from this little studio apartment, but looking forward to being back in the studio, the actual studio, and hopefully that's where the next review happens. So I'll catch you later. Cheers.